Open your ears and crack some beers. You are listening to episode 34 of Retro Hangover.
And hello, Internet. Welcome to episode 34 of the Retro Hangover podcast. We are rapidly recognizing residents running reality, realizing recording really rocks. Let's wrestle raccoons. Welcome once again to the Retro Hangover podcast. I'm your co-host, Chris Copleen, and here's your host, Shane Dick Dragon Tyrant Koski.
Great. This is good. I love that this is a thing now. That's fantastic. Also, points for the alliteration this time. I feel like we're improving. And also have another great idea. Trash Panda Wrestling Association. Let's talk about this.
Trash Panda. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. We can introduce it because it is WrestleMania weekend. But before we get into too much diatribe here, and we talk about wrestling raccoons against people like Roman Reigns, because that
I just
be
feel
applicable
like that should just be the whole episode now.
Yes, wrestling raccoons with Roman Reigns. We have Ryan Trainor here today from the Ultimate Nerd Podcast. He is joining us. Thank you, Ryan, for coming here. Say a few words. Introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, guys. I think I'm going to need a first aid spray for this hangover I have, but it's great to be on the show. And yeah, man, just big fan and glad to be on this episode.
I'm surprised you didn't request herb.
Yeah,
I'm all about that mixed herb life.
I had one of those. I'm like, should it be the first aid herb? But again, the first aid spray does it all, right?
That's true.
I don't want to mix shit up, so.
I mean, sometimes those herbs can be laced.
That's too much like work.
Exactly.
All right. Well, in any case, welcome to the podcast. So, been a little while since we recorded, in all honesty. I think last time we recorded 3 weeks ago, just more of a preemptive kind of recording. So,
Chris,
Shane.
You're shattering the illusion, okay? Quiet.
Sorry, I'm breaking the fourth wall. We totally recorded 2 weeks ago. There is no magic.
On a regular schedule all the time.
Always. But in any case, since then, Shane, what have you been up to?
Oh man, I don't know. Lots of stuff. I'm super tired today. I was chaperoning a field trip for high school kids overnight last night. So if you didn't have this happen in your own life, or you're not old enough to have high school age children of your own, which none of us are, they got this thing called Grad Bash. It's for seniors. At the end of the year, they go do fun stuff. It's like I want to say that it's like, a celebration of like, hey, you made it. Congrats. You survived. But to be fair, it's actually for all of the seniors. So even the ones that are like, you might not actually pass, they still get to go. So I feel like maybe it's just a consolation prize for them. But anyway.
Participation trophy weekend?
Yeah, kind of like that.
Okay.
Yeah, but so we went to Universal Studios because I think most of our listeners know at this point that we were based out of Florida, so that's not that far away for us. And it was a good time. It's, a lot of coffee involved, but outside of that, it was good. It also was like a 2.5 hour bus ride one way, which means I had plenty of time to get my mobile gaming in. Speaking of which, have either of you dove into the Elder Scrolls Blades yet?
I have not.
No.
Okay,
Nope.
Cool. So just me. So I'll keep this brief. But if you're fans of the Elder Scrolls series at all, you can check it out. But I'm gonna be honest. Right now, it's in early access and not super great. It's pretty bare bones, and the monetization model is hot garbage. There's
Surprise.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, okay. It actually is a little bit of a surprise. And the only reason I say that is because Fallout Shelter exists. And the monetization in that is actually not bad. It's like, the least intrusive of a lot of them. But this one, it just has chests with timers that lock you out of being able to open other chests. And it's basically Elder Scrolls, like chests. That's what it should be called, because that's all you're doing for like 90% of the heavy air quotes gameplay. But
Interesting.
yeah. But yeah, man, other than that, I think that's pretty much it. I've been getting some time in on that thing we're going to talk about today. And also started New Game Plus on Dark Souls because of course I did.
I mean, I don't think you play anything other than Dark Souls.
Listen, man, just because you can see in Discord when I fire something up on Steam doesn't mean you know my life.
I mean, I'm not that intrusive on what you play, actually, but I don't have to be. Do you have that amiibo yet, by the way? The Dark Souls one?
I do. And shout out to my brother for that one, actually. He bought 2 of them when they were released, and I managed to talk him into giving me one of them.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Go Amiibo.
Amiibos, by the way, super, super popular on Instagram.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you want those Insta likes, just post some Amiibos, apparently.
It works.
Yeah,
I've
whatever.
got like 4.
Whatever works, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So Chris, how about yourself? What have you been up to?
Shit. Well, let's see here. Spent a week in Beaufort, South Carolina. That was nice, and I got to go on some live streams that happen on Sunday nights at 9 p.m. on Twitch, and went and talked smack to someone playing Final Fantasy Adventure. That was enjoyable.
Yeah, that sounds like fun. I should try that out.
You should. It's the Retro Hangover Twitch stream on Sundays at 9 p.m. to 11 p.m.
Sounds intriguing.
Hopefully pretty routinely. In any case, so I was in Beaufort, South Carolina doing some work. That was pretty fun. Then went from Beaufort and went up to Knoxville, Tennessee. Got done with work early and went to a town called Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and that was a lot of fun. Just enjoying, places with the opportunity of working. So I really haven't had a lot of time to game, especially with my college routine. But I've been trying to play a lot more and wrap up the game I was talking about last week, Panzer Dragoon Saga, because it's not a long game, so I can get through that quickly. Briefly played the game we're talking about today, and then realized something with comparing. So I got the PlayStation Classic, much to against my better judgment, but I got it for super cheap. I got it at a discount price, and I got 20% off in addition to that discount price. So I got a pretty good deal, and there's no other cheaper way if I ever want to play Persona on a physical copy. And I know it's not a physical copy of Persona, however, I digress. Not a bad deal for the price I got it on. But then I realized my son saw that I had it, and he was like, well, I want to play the PlayStation Classic. And I was like, yeah, sure, cool. No problem there. PlayStation Classic is your pal. And I hooked it up, and hey, it's a subtle joke. I just put it in there. People who are smart will get it. I'm
going to edit that.
So I watched him play. So I was playing our game this week on my Saturn, which is hooked up to my CRT TV with component cables, and it looks great. And then I watched him play the same game through the PlayStation Classic on the HDMI TV connection. Through the well, that's the only way you can really play the PlayStation Classic, so duh. And it looked terrible, and it just made me realize
Quelle surprise.
what the hell is going on. So yeah, for the record, CRT TVs are better than HD TVs because Resident Evil. There we are.
Old man yells at cloud.
Bringing it back home to the Resident style, I guess.
Yes. So that's what I've been up to: college, traveling, and Saturn games. How about you, Ryan? Tell us a little bit about what you got going on, game-wise or just in life-wise, and what you got, man.
Yeah, I did the fortunate accident and signed up for GameFly, which, it's actually pretty cool. A friend of mine kind of coaxed me into it, which, is a good idea for trying to play a lot of games and stuff. And it's not a bad thing, but I decided to have my first game to be as Dragon Warrior 11 or Dragon Quest 11 or whatever. And I just kind of I've been really busy with my life with just podcasting and just like trying to do a bunch of stuff. And that game, you need to sit down for a couple hours, if you know what I mean.
just a few.
Just a few, yeah. And I've been sitting down like an hour or two a night or something and barely scraping the surface of talking to other friends and stuff that have beaten it already. And they're like, yeah, you're nowhere close to anywhere. So, but it's all good. I love the game. It looks amazing. And yeah, there's zombies in that game.
Toriyama zombies.
Exactly. Yeah, they look really cool.
See, that sounds a lot like Chris talking to me about like FF9 leading up to that episode. He was just like, so where you at? I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, this thing's happening right now. And he's like, dude, that's like, you're in disc 2. And I'm like, I feel accomplished. Okay.
See, that's why we need to do a Chrono Trigger episode, because that game is only like 25 hours long.
I mean, it would also give me an excuse to actually go back and finish Chrono Trigger, because I might not have done that.
Well, it wouldn't take you very long is my point. Then you pretend you played it a lot back in the day. We can lie.
It's a fun-ass game.
It's great. All right. In any case, I've already let that drop, but if you're on Instagram, if you follow me or the Retro Hangover podcast or the Ultimate Nerd podcast or Ryan's Instagram feed, you know that this episode this week is about Resident Evil in its original form, with discussions about the remake. So we will continue here with a brief history on Resident Evil. Do any of you have anything to say before we jump into that?
Jill sandwich.
And that would be delicious. All right. And here we go with the brief history of Resident Evil.
Resident Evil.
1998, July. Alpha Team is flying around the forest zone situated in northwest Raccoon City, where we are searching for the helicopter of our compatriots, Bravo Team, who disappeared during the middle of our mission. Bizarre murder cases have recently occurred in Raccoon City. There are outlandish reports of families being attacked by a group of about 10 people. Victims were apparently eaten. Bravo Team went to the hideout of the group and then disappeared. There are only 3 STARS members left now: Captain Wesker, Jill, and myself. We don't know where Barry is. They have escaped into the mansion where they thought it was safe. Yet. In 1989, Capcom released a horror-based role-playing game called Sweet Home for the Famicom, a licensed game from a Japanese movie of the same name. The game featured a small and specialized party navigating through a haunted mansion with limited health and weapons and resources available. Despite its positive reception in Japan, the game never saw an official release into the United States, mostly due to the content. 4 years later, Sweet Home's creator, Takuro Fujiwara, proposed that they make a follow-up based on his previous game, Sweet Home. Capcom and Fujiwara would tap Shinji Mikami, known for his success with Goof Troop for the Super Nintendo, to lead the project, which had begun production on the Super Nintendo in 1993, before it was shipped over to the PlayStation in 1994. Capcom chose the PlayStation over the Saturn, even though Capcom had a decent relationship with Sega because of the PlayStation's ability to push polygons. Initially, a full Sweet Home remake, Resident Evil was to be a 3D first-person exploration game, with its setting heavily influenced by The Shining, with a more psychological horror aspect, before eventually shifting over to the American zombie horror genre. During development, Mikami had time to play Alone in the Dark, widely regarded as being one of the first survival horror games, and decided to model his new game off a similar approach, with 3D models having pre-rendered backgrounds. On March 22, 1996, Biohazard would release in Japan, with the American release, named Resident Evil, being only 8 days later. A name change in America happened due to conflicting names of a Sega Genesis shooter called Biohazard Battle and an alt-metal band from New York called Biohazard. They wanted to avoid the copyright claims, of course. Lawsuits suck. While Mikami was only expecting the game to sell about 200,000 copies, the game went on to be a massive success. It received high amounts of critical acclaim, with the original version of the game moving 2 and 750,000 units, becoming the best-selling game for the fledgling console at the time. Later editions of the game, which would be the Director's Cut and Director's Cut DualShock Edition, would go on to sell an additional 2 and a third million units, bringing the total to well over 5 million units sold for the original PlayStation. Resident Evil would go on to be a massive franchise in its own right, spawning 7 numbered sequels and numerous spin-offs with a successful movie franchise. It even received a remake in 2002 from the Nintendo GameCube, which for many is considered the standard for what to expect when complete remaking a game, and truly welcoming one, once again, into the world of survival horror. And that is a brief history of Resident Evil.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. As usual. Ooh, we got to clap this time. I like that.
Standing ovation.
Oh, I was standing the whole time.
I know.
Truly riveting. Yeah, so actually I didn't know about this whole Sweet Home thing at all. And also as a side note, I'm compelled to just, put Sweet Home Alabama as the backing track for the entirety of this history section now.
Please don't.
That's way more horrifying.
And it's a little close to home too, Shane.
Oh, snap.
You remember I have the ability to edit these things out, right?
Have you guys seen the gameplay for Sweet Home?
Yes.
It's actually pretty interesting. I never played it myself, but if I found like a port or some like emulator or something like that, that would be I don't know. I'd like to mess around with it for a little hour, see how it is. Actually, talking about Persona, kind of reminded me a little bit about the original Persona with like walking through the schools and stuff like that. And like it's kind of like an RPG in a sense, but
from what I understand, it's a complete RPG. I mean, it's a total RPG.
Yeah.
And if you really think about it, it has a lot of aspects that carried over into Resident Evil 0, where you would leave party members behind and you would be doing things asynchronously with party members because certain party members could do certain things that other ones couldn't. So, and that kind of carried over to Resident Evil. But before we really talk about the nitty-gritty of Resident Evil itself, let's start out with our guest today. What was your first experience playing Resident Evil? What was your introduction to the game?
I was glad that you guys picked me for this episode because I do have a big this had a big impression on me for video games in general because I was a big zombie fan, and at the time, I watched all like Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, like a lot of George Romero kind of stuff, and Resident Evil came out, and obviously having a PlayStation, my brother got this game because I have an older brother, and he just wanted the next best thing, but obviously I would go into his room and play his stuff. And it was really funny because I thought this game was just like basically everything else, like Mario or whatever, just not what Resident Evil is. And I started playing it, and after getting through the opening, I got to the first part where you see the first zombie, and I could not play anymore. I was... At my age of, 7, 8, whatever it was, but I was honestly terrified. And I never felt this kind of terror before. And I mean, I guess maybe in movies, but you just walk away from that. Video games is something different where you can go back to that and you can try to like overcome it. And that's kind of how I felt. I had some neighbor friends that I had over, and I'm like, you got to see this game, because they didn't have a PlayStation, so I was like, check this game out. And we would watch it, and they were a little older than me, so they thought it was hilarious. And I was just cowering into the other room, and they were not understanding why I get past 10 minutes of this game. So it took me a few days, but after that, I just fell in love with it, and it became definitely one of my favorite series, I would have to say, and just, I played every port of this pretty much, and just, it's just like really cool, and I like where the series has gone in some ways. So.
Oh, I'm sure that we're gonna touch on that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so that intro sequence actually, it's funny because I can't quite put my finger on it, but that first zombie reveal when you get that cutscene, there's something about the way that zombie is rendered that is just so unsettling. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
the eyes or what.
And can I say, it's like, it wasn't the opening that scared me, because the opening was awesome.
Right, yeah.
And it was
in the cheesiest way.
for sure. But at that time, I had ass. And, I'm a little kid seeing people shoot nothing and just things happening. And then I see 2 seconds of a animated, I couldn't tell what at the time what it was, but that just scared the shit out of me. And it's just funny because that full intro didn't do anything to me besides I just thought it was cool. And that 2-second clip basically of a zombie turning over and looking at you just shook me to my boots. It was crazy,
Yeah, you're just like, no,
Yeah.
I'm done. That's it.
Yeah.
I actually want to talk about that clip briefly, and I think the North American version, because I don't know if you know this, but the North American version of that clip, and the intro for that matter, were both heavily censored from the Japanese release. So the original clip in Japan has the zombie, munching on Kenneth over there, having himself a Kenneth sandwich. Well, not that, because it's not Jill sandwich. So having himself, I guess we'll say, a Kenneth hoagie. And
There you go.
You hear like a snapping sound. Now, in the Japanese version, you see Kenneth's head roll off and you see it half eaten.
Yeah.
Which doesn't happen in the North American version before you see the zombie turn his head and look at you. And that's why I was saying, that's what I would say the North American version, I think, is better, because the focus is on the zombie the entire time. You don't really know what he's eating. You know he's eating a person, but you don't know the other details. And I think that's a finer point on horror a lot, where people say, it's not what you see that scares you. It's what you don't see that your mind tells you is going on. So I actually think that clip was probably more effective in the North American version, especially how things have aged with CG than it was in the Japanese one.
Yeah, that's
Totally.
a good point.
You can see the setup right there. I mean, you had that epic, obviously, beginning opening, and then when you get in and everything calms down, and it just seems like a game where, you just wander around looking. Like, they made you tunnel to that, that full motion video, and it was just like so well planned. You could see, and like game development standards, I would say, and it's just really cool, looking back on it in that sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. All right, so who wants to, Chris, do you want to go next? Because I got a list of things that I want to talk about for this, so I don't want to dominate the conversation.
Okay. I mean, yeah, because I see your notes here, and yeah, that's definitely for a conversation. So, my first experience with Resident Evil, I had just gotten a PlayStation. I think it was after the N64 came out, so it had been a year since the game had been out, because the N64 came out late 1996, and because we were all spoiled brats growing up as kids, I got an N64 for Christmas. My brother got a PlayStation, and my sister got a Saturn. So yeah, we weren't hurting back then. So one of my friends came over shortly after Christmas, and he said he had this game called Resident Evil. And then I wasn't too interested in the PlayStation. Never really had paid much attention to it. I thought it was just going to be a system I would have to suffer through and wait until Final Fantasy VII came out. But he brought over this game I'd never heard of, and I was completely blown away by it. And much like Ryan said, how terrifying it was for me at that age to play that game. Even with if you look back nowadays and you look at how the graphics look, it's almost laughable that someone could be
hilarious,
scared. Right. But these were, at the time, state-of-the-art graphics. The level of immersion that the game had, especially for someone at my age at the time, was mind-blowing. And how difficult it was for me to get through the game regularly. Now, when I strapped a Game Shark onto the back of the PlayStation and gave myself a bazooka with unlimited ammos, rocket launcher, I'm sorry, not bazooka, rocket launcher, the game became significantly easier and less terrifying.
Huh.
You cheated the system?
I would happen to say I was just taking advantage of an opportunity. So, yeah, but from there, I really loved the series, got into the series, and found it to be a lot of fun, especially when the remake came out post Resident Evil 4, and how much that made me appreciate my GameCube that was collecting dust in the face of my PlayStation 2. It was so great to see that remake, and that remake is definitely fantastic. So that's my, albeit very brief, interaction with how I got introduced to the series.
Cool. So mine is actually very different from both of yours. I mean, I think Chris kind of knows this already, but I was almost exclusively...
Chris Redfield?
Yes, actually, specifically him. We're best friends. We're actually very close on Facebook. Yeah, but no,
I hear his sister's hot.
Well, just don't let him hear you say that. But yeah, I was almost exclusively a Nintendo person as far as consoles were concerned. So my exposure to the PlayStation back when it was the flagship Sony console was relegated mostly to renting it from the local Blockbuster, which for the young ones in the audience, that's a place that you used to go to borrow video games. It's like a library, but you have to pay for it. I know.
It's physical GameFly.
Yeah, it's a weird concept, but stay with me on this one. So I actually didn't play the original Resident Evil. My exposure to the series actually started with RE2, as a matter of fact, which I'm sure we'll probably end up talking about at some point. So I kind of circled back around to this one. And most of my experience with it has been far more recent than you two, for sure. And I've played, actually, I think I have a copy of the original here at my place, but I've put more time into the remake on Steam, actually. Which for me, someone coming in, kind of after the fact, I don't necessarily have the nostalgia going for me. So being able to play the game, but also have updated graphics and also not tank controls, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, in a second, is nice. It's a good way for someone who didn't play it before to kind of get into it. So that's kind of been my vector for RE. So how do you guys feel about talking about some of our discussion points about some of the pros and cons of this game? You feel like we're ready to dive into this because I know I am.
It's itchy and tasty time.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good point.
Sounds like we should get that checked out. All right, cool. Let's just dive into this then. So, you know what? We'll end with the positives, because I think we'll leave it on a better note that way, and maybe that also we won't get some people being salty about me potentially shitting on Resident Evil, which I'm not, for the record, but So some of the things that kind of bugged me as I was playing through it, and I'm also relying on the two of you to give me some sort of perspective on this, since you were there, at the beginning. But number one, the inventory management thing, in my opinion, sucks balls. So you have a very limited amount of space, right, to carry items, and this includes your weapons. And you have a storage box, for all your extraneous stuff that only exists in save rooms throughout the game. And so you have to be very particular about what you carry with you. So I get it, right? From a realism standpoint, I suppose you can only carry so much stuff, particularly if you're playing as Jill, because those pants are very tight and probably don't have many pockets. But
she has those saddlebags, though.
That's true. Yeah. See, there you go. You made my point for me. All right.
Details.
Saddlebags. Let's talk about that.
I don't know what they're called.
I'm gonna let's go with a fanny pack. It's a tactical
She has
fanny
two of
pack.
them. They're on each hip. I totally understand.
Dual wield fanny packs. All right.
Yes. All right. That's dual wield. That
she also has that beret.
Well, that depends. If you're playing the remake, you can play as Jill with like a tactical ball cap on instead, but I digress. So okay, so I get it, right? Like why they did this. Because it forces you as a player to kind of choose, what you feel is most important to take with you. But I'm going to be honest, running back to those save places especially if you're going into this blind, right? If you don't know, like, oh, I'm going to need this item up for this next section, then going back there when you realize that feels bad from a gameplay perspective, at least in my opinion, because I got frustrated with that, not having, a walkthrough or anything like that, and trying to play it just blind as if I had never seen this before. It's rough.
I'm gonna have to kind of disagree if you take into consideration that Resident Evil is supposed to be more of an adventure game, and when you take into consideration the limitations of the amount of ammunition you can carry and how limited the ammo is throughout the game, how limited health items are, the fact that you're planning routes from point A to point B, and the ability of you to explore and figure out what you need, going back to each the safe room or inventory room, whatever you want to call it, knowing you have to go back through there and you have to wonder, what enemies have I killed? What's going to be in my way? Do I have enough ammunition? Do I have enough health? Am I going to be able to make it? It adds in many ways to the tension that the game is trying to go. Now, it might break the immersion. It might become more frustrating, especially now that, the graphics have aged to the point where it's not a terrifying game, right? Maybe more so for the remake, I understand that, because those graphics have been updated. But I think that does add a level of tension, knowing that if you don't go prepared, it can be a bad day for you because you don't know what you left alive and what you didn't leave alive behind you in your path.
Okay, but here's the thing, right? So I'm with you on the tension aspect, and I do think that that's what they were going for. But I think that you can achieve that by limiting specifically the combat and health items. And the rest of it, like all of the non-combat stuff, like your puzzle items, essentially, I think that those should not have been limited by inventory space. I think that you should just have those at all times, because at least, again, this is purely subjective, but going from a safe room and then going to an area where you've encountered a puzzle, and then you suddenly have this moment where you're like, shit, I need that wooden crest or whatever the hell, and I decided not to take it with me because I didn't know if I'd need it, and then you have to backtrack. To me, that's not tension. That's actually just frustration, like immediately. Now, if you limit it so that what they're saying essentially is you can only carry X number of weapons and so many bullets, for example, and you can only have this number of health items. Like, that is also kind of limiting the player in a way that is going to provide that sort of tension and sense of danger, without introducing that frustration of, oh, okay, I now realize that I needed this item, and now I need to go back like 6 rooms to go grab it and come back. Like, that just seems like, in a way, it almost seems like it's artificially lengthening the game, because it doesn't feel necessary.
It is artificially. It's not in a way it's artificially lengthening the game. It is artificially lengthening the game. And that's definitely because there was a design that they tried to implement in the American version where those item boxes weren't connected throughout the mansion.
Yeah.
And that was directly to lengthen the game. It was intentional, but they didn't do that. That would have just made it a lot worse.
We would not be talking here right now if that was a thing. So
see, okay, Ryan and I are on the same page about this, because if that would have happened, I would have said, well, fuck this game, I'm gonna go play something else and never touch it again, because that would be infuriating.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree. Yeah, with you on that one.
I kind of look at, like, since this is a retro game now, even with like the remake and stuff, but I played it, on the PlayStation and like on the DS, and it's just kind of, I like the fact that I knew the pattern of everything, and this is with like 1, 2, and 3 basically of Resident Evil.
Mm-hmm.
Just the way you play these games, nothing like comes different with it. You started over, like all the zombies are in the right place, and you can kind of strategize in that sense if you replay it, but I guess the first time through, I could understand you being frustrated with it, and it is because it does take up more time. I could only imagine my first time through Resident Evil 1 would have been like as long as, probably how I'm playing Dragon Warrior 11 now. So, but it was probably super long when you can basically beat this game in a couple hours. But I guess it's just like kind of like learning how to just know what you need to do with it and who you're playing with, and if you're Chris and Jill. I don't know. It just kind of gives it more depth to it.
I suppose. I don't know. I feel like I just sort of fundamentally disagree with some of the design decision around that. Like, I guess from a replayability standpoint, I can see that. But, and actually, Ryan, it's good that you kind of touched on the Chris versus Jill thing, because that is an excellent segue into the other major gripe that I have with this. And I feel like this is probably going to be controversial too. I don't know. But the two playable characters you have actually kind of vary wildly in how difficult the game ends up being, depending on who you pick. And there is zero things that communicate that to you on the outset. So again, coming from a perspective of someone who's like picking this up for the first time and playing through it and not having any foreknowledge of that whatsoever, you have no idea, right?
Well,
apparently,
isn't it the girl gets it the easier way and the guy has it the hard way?
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. Yeah, which I mean, we could go off on like a half-hour discussion of how like
this is the '90s, right?
Sexist, but
Resident Evil misogynist edition,
right? But apparently, also for the record, and Chris is probably going to jump in here in a second. I see some annotations to our notes that the Saturn version actually tells you this. Is that right?
So, I mean, at least the version I was playing. So in the Japanese release, which is the version I have for the Saturn, when you start a new game, underneath Jill it says easy, and underneath Chris it says hard.
That seems very presumptuous. They don't know her. They don't know her life,
dirty,
right? Yeah.
Very, very dirty. But
let's talk about that Jill sandwich again.
I mean, I wish I had a PlayStation, the original PlayStation manual in front of me to see if that was in the manual, because those are things that came with video games back then, and you could read them, and they would typically tell you things about the game you were about to play.
What? Wait, Chris, you're saying that there were physical items printed on dead trees?
Yeah, we were terribly wasteful back then.
That's crazy.
And yeah, I know. But that may have said that in there, but I don't remember what it said in that damn thing. So if I'm just gonna play the game and fire up a digital version of it, most people don't read manuals anymore anyway. You're never gonna know. You're right. Who's gonna be the more difficult path throughout the game?
And you guys can keep me honest on this one, because I think you both know, but in case we didn't make it clear, in my preparation for this episode, I've been exclusively playing the HD remake. I did not touch the original at all, so there might be some differences there, and you can fill me in on that one if it is different. But from the PC version of the HD remake, it's weird because there's this disconnect actually, where the game asks you to select a difficulty setting, and then you pick who you're going to play as. But who you play as also affects the difficulty of the game, but just not in such a direct way as like, oh, well, there's a different enemy placement, or they have less health or do more damage or whatever. But that part, the Chris versus Jill thing, is not communicated at all. So
yeah, that's an interesting point, because especially in the original, if you actually look at it, it's like Chris is more of the wuss, because he's just holding little keys in his pocket all through the mansion, while Jill has to carry around basically the heaviest guns you could ever expect anyone to carry. And in the HD, that is funny, but I guess I would have to look at that, and I haven't played that one in a minute, so
yeah.
Well, just remember, Jill is great at unlocking things.
She's the master.
She's the master of unlocking. She can play a piano, and Chris doesn't know what music is.
Yeah, Chris is just an idiot that smokes cigarettes.
Yes, well, only in Japan. And she makes a great sandwich. to eat.
Wait a minute. So that piano sequence, does that play out differently if you play as Chris? Do you not get that like secret room?
Nah,
You need Rebecca.
Yeah.
Okay.
You think Chris can read music? Jeez.
He is dumb. Chris is dumb.
Yeah, that's why his sister
He
is
has no
way
skills.
better.
Because girls like guys who have skills. And that's why no one likes to play as Chris.
Nunchuck skills.
Not lockpicking skills. Definitely not lockpicking.
No.
He needs to reroll.
No, but I mean, we can.
He punches rocks.
That's true. I think at the end of the day, though, we could probably say that Barry is the real MVP. I mean, he just like shows up out of nowhere and he's like, "Hey, Jill, here's some acid rounds. Like, where did you even find those? Like, don't ask." Okay, great, sure.
Wesker gave him to me.
That is the lore, probably.
So I mean, that's okay. At least for me, and you guys can jump in, but those are pretty much the two big negatives that I had. The rest of it is mostly praise. So before we go off on, what's the word I'm looking for?
Tank controls.
Oh, well, great. Thank you. I'm glad you reminded me of that. Yeah, Chris, why don't you talk about tank controls?
That was a slow segue, just like a tank control is.
Nice.
As we slowly rotate into our next session. Yeah, my son, like I said, my son was playing this today, and he couldn't put it better. He's like, the controls are terrible, and I just made fun of him and said, the controls aren't terrible, you're just terrible at controlling.
Get good.
Get good. Get good, son, in the literal sense. But yeah, tank controls, I don't love them, I don't hate them, so I'm not going to put them in positive or negatives. I think once you learn how to control it, you can really play the game well. I think if you had controls that you press the button and they go into the direction that they're supposed to, I think it would kind of break the game a little bit, which I think is what you start to see Resident Evil 4-ish and moving forward. Where yeah, I get it. Technically, those are still tank controls in Resident Evil 4, but because it's over the shoulder, it's nowhere near as tense and as scary as Resident Evil 1 and 2 when they released or the remakes. It's a completely different kind of feel. And I actually do think the tank controls, purposefully or not, do add to the tension and do add to the experience Resident Evil is trying to go for.
When you can shoot and walk, that's kind of where Resident Evil started to tip their scales and stuff, because especially with like the first Resident Evil tank, I mean, the controls do suck, like there's no doubt about it, but if I go through a playthrough with Resident Evil 1, it doesn't bother me just for how comfortable I am with this game. And even with like 2 and the other ones, even if the controllers are getting better, but you got like auto aim and like lock on targets and just walking and shooting with the other Resident Evils, you just feel those weights off your shoulders and you're just like, oh my God, this is so nice. But the games are so much more intense as you get into the later games. So you go to Resident Evil 1 and it's like, oh, there's 2 zombies here. So you almost like the tank controllers with just how like silly it is, you know?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't feel like the updated control scheme really detracts from the experience at all, because like playing the remake, I, immediately swapped the controls to not suck mode, and it feels fine. Like, I don't think it really takes away from the tension or anything. And I think actually, Ryan, you touched on it. I think the big point is the ability to move and shoot. When you are not able to do that in RE1 and even in the remake with the better controls, that's another sort of like, player decision that you have to make. You're like, okay, am I going to run from this, or am I going to deliberately stop and try to engage, this zombie or dog or what have you? So that, I think, organically creates that tension, which I appreciate. And it adds to the overall atmosphere of the game, which is one of the pros that we're going to talk about too. But I don't feel like the lack of tank control really detracts at all. But again, that's someone that's coming in from a newer perspective, I guess.
And I can kind of understand where you're coming from too. It's not like I'm saying it makes it way better, because I look at a game like Silent Hill,
mm-hmm.
which if you release same time frame, and back then I still do believe Silent Hill is the scarier game.
Agreed.
And Silent Hill does not have tank controls.
It's also probably why I liked it more.
Probably why.
Yeah.
But it's also a scarier, more tense, more atmospheric game.
Yeah. So,
That's a good point.
So Ryan, any other things that you wanted to point out as far as, you know, maybe things that kind of bothered you about it before we go into what we like?
Did you guys? I guess a little bit. Did you guys like the backgrounds and stuff, and like going into like other things with? I don't know. Did that bother you with like looking where your enemies are and stuff? Do you know what I mean?
You mean
No,
like
that didn't bother me.
You mean like
Yeah.
the fixed camera angles?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, actually, no. I like that, as a matter of fact. Which, look at this.
I like it
you
too.
see, you see what's going on here, Chris. Like, Ryan is the segue master. Like, it's
Yes.
perfect. He just sets
I'm
these
not,
up. Or just
I am not
knock
the
'em
Jill
down.
of this podcast.
Dude, that has some implications I don't want to talk about. Okay. But no, that actually is an excellent segue, because one of the things that I personally really appreciate about this game is the very deliberate choice on the developers' behalf to have fixed camera angles for every area in the game. I think that is, and actually in my notes I said that this was probably, for me, the biggest contributor to the overall atmosphere that this game generates, which is excellent. It gives the game this real cinematic kind of quality that that you don't get when you have, you know, full control over the camera. I feel if you've got that, you know, the right hand stick that just is dedicated to being able to look wherever you want all the time. I don't know about you guys, but I tend to abuse that. And my perfect example of that, of course, this is not a surprise, is Dark Souls. The first time I played through Dark Souls, I was abusing the shit out of that camera because it's third person. I would creep up to a corner of a hallway and turn the camera just enough so I could see what was on the other side before I actually like went out with, you know, my shield up all the time. And
That's
I feel
understandable for that game.
well, right, yeah. But I feel like I would do the same thing here too, you know, if Resident Evil gave you that ability, I feel like it would actually remove a lot of that really great tension, because you have no control over that. When you walk into a room, it's like, this is the view that we're giving you, and it's all very intentional, right? There are a lot of instances where you see like part of a hallway and you're like, oh, okay, shit, like is there something around that curve, like I can't see past this, and then you start slowly creeping towards it, and then, you know, a zombie comes walking out from behind a, you know, a dresser or something, and it's all set up perfectly to have those moments happen that I feel like would have been spoiled if the player could just kind of spin the camera around and see what's coming.
Then it'd be Resident Evil 5 or 6.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So there you go.
That's a good point, and I like to bring it up because I mess with that so much. I was like trying to break the game in the sense of like even like going through like another playthrough, or maybe jumping back through the door and coming back into a room, because sometimes the zombies would stay there, and especially with the HD one, it was almost more scary because the sound effects are so more intense.
Mm-hmm.
You would be tiptoeing and like waiting until you triggered the reaction to whatever's in the next scene, because since in like the HD one they could obviously like come over all this stuff, but like I just thought that was so funny, even though I'm like, there's a zombie in front of that door that I can't see the way this is angled, and I would just like tiptoe away and like just wait till you hear that movement, and it I don't know. It's just like, I'm like, why the hell am I doing this? It's like making my gameplay like just like adding hours to my day, you know. But it's fun, you know. You just want to just be a G at this game, I guess.
Yeah, so I just remembered there's one particular. I mean, there are many, but one that came to mind. It's early in the game where you've kind of got this hallway that's kind of in roughly like an S shape almost, and there are these body length mirrors leaning up against the walls, and as soon as you walk into the first part of the hallway, you see one of the mirrors kind of leaning to the side, and if you look closely enough, you can see a zombie
Oh,
at the
yeah,
opposite
yeah.
end of the hallway, just kind of like hanging out there. Like that. Those are the kind of moments I'm talking about. Those are great.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
You just can't get those in a full 3D atmosphere.
Right.
You need it with those fixed camera angles.
Yeah, and that's where like Resident Evil 4 is a great game, but it never had anything like that, I would say. So it had a lot of good stuff, but not like that.
Yeah. And so kind of piggybacking off the zombie thing, one of the other ones that I pointed out was just some of the mechanics in the game that you kind of just learn organically by playing. One of the big ones, and this is probably going to sound dumb to both of you because you're like, yeah, no shit, of course that's what you do. But I had no idea. I actually didn't know till I was like 3/4 of the way through the first part of the mansion. But turns out you should probably burn the zombies after you shoot them, or they come back super pissed off and really red.
Which is actually something that was introduced in the remake.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not in the original.
I did not know that.
Once you kill dead zombies are dead zombies in the original.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, they're no crimsons. No crimsons till the HD.
Okay.
But you do get hunters, and they suck.
Yeah, but they're in the HD too. So you get another enemy and a more powerful enemy. It's like Jesus Christ, but
Okay, so this is purely a newer experience then. All right. Yeah, see, this is where my experience with the game is kind of showing that I didn't come till later, but I actually thought it was a good thing. So I guess it's a good addition, I suppose, but I thought it was just a really good mechanic because then it's one of those player decisions that you have to make of, I have X amount of, kerosene in my flask and available to me. Is this zombie that I just killed, is it in a location that is critical enough to me that I'm going to use up a very limited resource to make sure that I don't have to deal with this again later? So I actually kind of liked that.
Now, if you do blow off their head, they don't come back as a crimson either.
and another good point too is if you're basically with the HD, the graphics alone obviously is what's the big, that's how it's so different from the original, but what especially like I read all like the magazines at the time, like totally spoiled. I know this game front to back, and I saw the new stuff that they were implementing, and I still was surprised on all the things that happened in the HD remake of Resident Evil. And that was with the Crimson Heads coming back, which you get the kerosene. I didn't do that in my first playthrough. But you had secondary weapons as well. With Chris had grenades and like I might be getting this mixed up, but you had like a secondary thing that they actually kept in with the RE2 remake, which just came out. And so it's like if you had these extra things like a knife or a grenade or a taser, if a zombie or a enemy bit you, you would get a basically free shot and like stab them or blow their head off in something. But this would be an item that you'd pick up throughout the mansion and stuff, which obviously was never in the original. So it was a cool twist on playing the game.
Yeah, I mean, I know I personally really appreciated the inclusion of the defensive items like that.
Yeah, they were awesome.
Yeah,
they were so cool.
The knives saved my ass on many occasions. I'm not gonna lie.
Sometimes I just like putting a grenade in a zombie's mouth. It was just awesome, Like,
yeah, I mean,
let's see what happens.
As you do, yeah.
And the taser is pretty cool. I always like that.
So I guess I think there's one more thing I want to touch on because we are starting to run a little bit long, and we like to keep a tight ship if possible. But I actually had a lot to talk about on this one. I think the other
it's a great game.
Well, it is a great game.
Wait, when are we going to talk about the movies?
That's a follow up.
No.
Okay, unpopular opinion. I actually like the movies.
All right, I gotta go,
guys. He's like, okay, yep, no, you know what? This has been fun.
Yeah. We'll talk about the movies. And I'll let Sam know this. Superfan Sam. We'll talk about the movies when we talk about Final Fantasy VIII.
Cool. So never. Great.
Just put explicit on that one if you have me on that episode. So for the Resident Evil movies.
Listen,
They are something
the
else.
first one was not that bad, okay? But anyway, the last thing I wanted to touch on was just I really appreciated the world design and the fact that it's kind of a very focused take on things. Games, especially now with the sort of glut of like open world, Ubisoft-esque games that we have at this point, it's very evident that they think that bigger is better, and that's not always the case. Particularly with like sequels, you feel like you have to one up yourself. So you can see it even in the Resident Evil series, where as it goes on, for the most part, we kind of circle back around in like 7, for instance, but the game world expands more and more because they kind of feel like the player needs to experience new and various things. But there is a lot to be said for a much more like a tighter focused experience. And I think having the majority of this game take place in the mansion itself and the residence that's kind of on the same grounds and what have you.
The evil residence. Yes.
All right, roll credits. I think it's actually really to its benefit for a number of reasons, but I think having fewer areas like this kind of allowed the developers to really put a lot more attention to detail into crafting them so intentionally, as we were kind of talking about with the fixed camera mechanic. And from a player perspective too, I think it kind of allows you to wrap your head around it contextually easier and kind of get immersed in it. So what happens, at least for me, is that these locales that you're in sort of become characters in the story. They have their own personality and they get fleshed out a lot more rather than just being a backdrop to whatever action is going on.
Absolutely. I don't think this game would have worked if you didn't have the initial setup of the mansion, if you didn't have all the tight corridors and various different rooms and having to navigate the mansion as you did. Because, I mean, this was an era that you still kind of saw things like that just as part of organic gameplay, just because of the memory you'd have that. Because, coming out of the 16-bit generation, but you're also entering into the era of Super Mario 64, where you were getting more and more expansive at the time. And, people wanted the extra storage capability so they could make bigger and better games. And that was the big topic of the time, the CD versus cartridge and storage capability and what you could do. So the fact they kept everything still kind of very claustrophobic and tight and narrowly focused did make the game that much better.
Yeah, and it's just nice because, especially with the Resident Evil 1, since the series became as big as we can talk about it now, I mean, with movies to the long, extensive series it is and all the stuff it became to be, I mean, it just still blows my mind to see, us talking about Resident Evil 1 to now. It's pretty nuts. So back to this, and it's still one of my favorite games. And even with the graphics aside, I mean, the HD one does hold you in because it looks so good, but it's so good because it has that linear kind of gameplay that I do miss in some games at sometimes, which is like what we talked about with everything's open world now and blah, blah, blah. But it's just, they still kind of kept that with a lot of their good ones, because even like Resident Evil 7 and even 4, like 4 had, like, you move around a lot, but it's still not really an open world if you really look at it.
Yeah. And I don't know about either of you, but I know that at this point, I'm personally pretty burnt out on the whole concept of having this giant open world with just like 1,000, checkpoints on a map to go, collect items or go up to viewpoints or whatever. Basically the Ubisoft formula. I think it's kind of played out at this point, and it feels exhausting because like you go into it kind of like what you were talking about with Dragon Warrior. It's just like, okay, so I'm basically setting myself up for like 80 hours of gameplay.
Yeah.
Do I really want to do this?
But that is that kind of game, and I guess you should just know your titles. That's kind of how I look at it, and that's why I was like, I had, just a little sidebar here, I had Devil May Cry 5 and that in my hand, and I was like, oh. And then after, when I went with Dragon Warrior, or Dragon Quest, whatever, I'm like, why didn't I just go with Devil May Cry. I know that's a short game.
And it's fun, it's compact, and it
exactly
drives to the point. Yeah.
So,
briefly before we wrap this up, I just have to say the voice acting and the live action acting is the best B-movie, cheesy, amazing, delicious part of this game. And we had to mention it in this episode. It had to be mentioned.
Joseph!
Joseph! No, don't go! I'll handle this. Yes, it's amazing.
I think that is
amazing.
one thing I missed out on the HD remake, because I think they replaced the voice lines.
Oh, it's terrible for how good that opening was with the HD remake, and they made it look so sweet. It's just like anyone that played Resident Evil 1 was not going to back that up. They're like, first one was better. First one was better.
Have you watched the intro, Shane? The original intro?
Yeah, a while ago, but yeah.
In color?
I think so.
The original was like black and white, kind of. So.
Oh.
It's hilariously, amazingly bad. It is so bad, it's amazing. Especially when they introduce the cast and you see them doing their posts, and you like see Wesker. He has this gel in his hair, and he just strokes his hair back, and then folds his arm and looks like he's too cool to be being filmed, and he has better things to do. It's so great. It's so. I love it,
dude. That was like the end of an era, because like, what was after that had live action actors and like that much of an impact?
Because they went to CG starting with 2.
For sure.
So,
yeah.
And you had, they were coming out of the make your own music video era of the Sega CD.
Oh God.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
that was the leftover remnants of what was going on with the CD technology, because of course CD technology meant you had to have live action actors.
Yeah, the final hurrah.
Resident Evil delivered in spades.
So thank Resident Evil for giving us the, putting down the live action sense of crappy full motion videos.
Hope this is not Chris's blood. So great. Love it.
And this is what I don't get. You guys are sitting here talking about how great the terrible like live action acting is, but y'all are going to go and shit on the Resident Evil movies. I would make the argument that those are just as bad. Because
they got a preview. It's like they couldn't do it in a minute, so why make a 2-hour movie about it? And +7.
It's kind of like the Hulk movie that came before the other Hulk movie. Not the Hulk movie as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I haven't watched that one, but the one that came out before that.
Yeah,
the one that was like really terrible.
One, yeah,
the Ang Lee one. Like you cannot go and you cannot watch that. It's terrible, right? Mm-hmm. But you go watch The Room, which is a much more terrible movie in every single facet. But you can actually sit through and watch The Room and make fun of it the entire time.
I did not.
That's the same thing. That's the same thing you got with the original Resident Evil.
Oh, hi, Mark.
And when you compare it to the Resident Evil movies.
Yeah. It's just, I just think it's with any video game movie. If I never played this game, never was a fan, never been on this podcast, and I saw the Resident Evil movies, I'd probably be a fan, but I'm already spoiled. Just can't go back,
I feel personally attacked by this.
Yeah.
We'll be talking for like 4 more hours if we get in the movie stuff. So
to be fair, it's the acting in the Resident Evil video game is better than Doom Annihilation.
Oh God.
I agree.
Now we're going into my sore spot territory. Let's not talk about that.
Die!
Listen, nothing is ever gonna top The Rock saying "Semper Fi, motherfucker" at the end of the original Doom movie. But anyway, I think we digress. So I feel like this might be a foregone conclusion given the conversation, but generally we like to kind of end this with our take on whether this is something that holds up for people today, whether you've got the nostalgia for it or not. And I know from my perspective, it's an absolute yes. I think whether you go to the original or you go to the HD remake, I think you're still going to have a great experience. I would say that if you're brand new to this, my personal take would be maybe go for the HD remaster, because I feel like that's going to be a little bit of an easier time to swallow. But there's something to be said for, experiencing the original, and I'm sure you two are probably going to disagree with me on that.
I would say play the remake. Just play the remake.
Ooh,
that's what I would
unexpected.
say. And go back to the original for the lulz if you've never played it. And that's about it. If you've never played Resident Evil, the original Resident Evil, or you've never played Resident Evil period, and you're looking to get into the first one, play the remake.
Yeah, I actually would say the same thing, because the HD remake is fantastic. It's gold standards of remake, and it's still doing that to this day with the Resident Evil 2 remake. But if you're really diehard people that are going to make a podcast about, retro video games, yeah, play the old Resident Evil and just see how it is and watch some gameplays if you don't, because it's not a hard game, and it might put you back into that time, but I guess if you're just starting out with it, I would just say play the HD.
Well, if you're playing blind, the original is hard.
Exactly.
It is a hard
That's
game.
what I'm saying, but people still play Game Boy games, so it's like, or Sega Saturn games, I would say.
Those seem like very specific examples.
Hey, feel attacked. But keep in mind, too, keep in mind, the remake is 17 years old now.
I know, isn't that what's crazy? And it still looks, really good.
It's still gorgeous. It's still beautiful.
Yeah.
As a Jill sandwich.
Take the old one and the HD and make a Jill out of it.
Nice.
Yes, berries in the middle.
Okay. I don't know about
sure.
this. Yeah, we're just like, no. Let's step that one back.
We're not going to invoke Rule 34. It's already been done.
That's inevitable.
Yes.
All right. So I guess on that note, probably wrap this baby up. So as usual, I think we had a pretty good discussion. I think so. Before we go into our usual thing, Ryan, where can our lovely listeners find you out on the vast interwebs?
Well, I do my own video game, anime kind of media podcast at Ultimate Nerd Podcast. You can find that on any podcast app or wherever you get your podcast. Or check out all my other work. I do a bunch of other podcasts at trainorpodcast.com. That's TRAINOR podcast.com. Yeah, check me out. And this has just been awesome, guys. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure having you. And it's great having great guests on this show. Really do appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
So on that note, as we are wont to do, if you would like to reach out to us at the Retro Hangover, you can do so from a number of vectors. We're basically on all of the major social media platforms, so you can find us there. Just search for Retro Hangover. If you want to go directly to our website, it is retrohangover.com. If you want to send us an email with any suggestions for topics or critiques about an episode that we've had here already, you can do that at podcast@retrohangover.com. Usually we'd say that the best way to reach out to us is probably going to be either Instagram or Facebook. That's where we are most of the time. And as Chris mentioned at the beginning of the episode, we are doing our regular stream Sundays now. So if you are free at 9 p.m. Eastern time on a Sunday and you want to hang out and see some retro games being played, I'm not going to say they're going to be played well, but we're playing them. Then you can check out Retro Hangover on twitch.tv and we will be there as well. I actually just got my recording / streaming corner here more or less finished and set up. I've got the new mic with the scissor boom and I feel all official. So actually tomorrow being Sunday as the time of recording on this thing, it is possible that we may be including a face cam for the first time. So you get to see my ugly mug. So there you go.
Hey, that thing looks sick. I saw the pictures. Very nice.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah. I would like to.
It reminds me of Resident Evil.
Say I would like.
Oh, are we talking about his room or his face?
Yes. But all right. Any last remarks before we shut this thing down?
Ryan?
I'm good.
All right. Well, in that case, without any further ado, until next time.
Grab your joysticks and play combat like a tank. Play your joysticks.